The church went silent the moment Peter stepped back from the altar. One step. That was all it took to break a woman's heart in front of 300 people. Naomi stood there in her white dress, holding a bouquet that suddenly felt too heavy, staring at the man who had promised to love her forever, as he looked at her like forever had expired. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Not the pastor, not the bridesmaids, not the guests with their phones raised. Even the music seemed to die in the air, leaving behind a silence so sharp it could cut through bone. Naomi's smile stayed on her face because her mind had not yet caught up with her heart. She thought maybe Peter was nervous. Maybe he had forgotten his vows. Maybe this was one of those strange wedding moments people laughed about years later. But Peter did not laugh. He looked at the floor, then at the crowd, then back at her. His jaw tightened. His eyes were dry. Too dry for a man about to destroy the woman who had stood beside him for 6 years. "I'm sorry, Naomi," he said. Her fingers closed tighter around the flowers. "I can't marry you." The words did not fall. They crashed. A soft gasp moved through the church. Naomi blinked once, then twice. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at him the way a person looks at a locked door during a fire, waiting for it to open, praying it will open, refusing to believe they are trapped. Behind her, one of her bridesmaids whispered her name, but Naomi barely heard it. All she heard was Peter. All she saw was his face, and all she felt was the slow, terrible weight of every eye in that church turning toward her. Her mother sat in the front row with both hands pressed to her chest. Her father stared at the ground, his face frozen in pain and shame. Naomi had never seen him look so small. This was the man who had walked her down the aisle with pride in his eyes. The man who had whispered, "You look beautiful, baby girl," before handing her over to Peter. Now he looked like he wished he could take that moment back. Naomi swallowed hard. "Peter!" she whispered, her voice shaking. "What are you saying?" Peter breathed out like he was tired, like she was the problem, like this was something she should have seen coming. "I'm saying I can't do this anymore." The room tightened. The cameras kept recording. Naomi felt heat rise to her face. Her knees weakened under the layers of satin and lace. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The day she had prayed for, saved for, planned for. The day she had stayed up late folding programs and picking flowers and making sure every little detail looked perfect. Even though Peter had barely helped, she had told herself he was busy. He was building his career. He was under pressure. She had made excuses because love can make a person generous with pain. But now, standing at the altar, she realized something that hurt more than the rejection. Peter had not changed that morning. He had only stopped pretending. A woman stood from the second row. The movement was small, but Naomi saw it. Everyone saw it. The woman wore a red dress, smooth, expensive, bold enough to look wrong inside a wedding filled with white flowers and soft gold ribbons. Her name was Emma, Naomi's childhood friend, the girl who had slept over at Naomi's house when they were 12, the girl who had eaten from Naomi's mother's kitchen, the girl Naomi had called sister even though they shared no blood. Emma stepped into the aisle, her face calm, almost sad but not sad enough. Naomi's breath caught. Peter looked at Emma, not by accident, not in confusion. He looked at her like she was the answer he had been waiting for, and that was when Naomi understood. The church did not need an announcement. Betrayal has its own language. It speaks through stolen glances, through guilty silence, through the way one person steps forward when another person is being thrown away. Naomi's eyes moved from Peter to Emma and back again. "No," she whispered. Peter looked away. That was the answer. The whispers began, quiet at first, then louder. A woman in the third row covered her mouth. 2 men near the back leaned toward each other, murmuring like they were watching breaking news. Someone's phone tilted higher. Someone else shook their head, not with pity, but with interest. Naomi could feel the crowd feeding on her pain. She had become the story.
Not the bride, not the woman.
The scandal. Emma walked closer, but not all the way to the altar. She stopped just far enough to look respectful and just close enough to be seen. "Naomi," she said softly, "I never wanted it to happen like this." The words were dressed in apology, but they smelled like victory. Naomi stared at her. "You knew?" Emma's eyes dropped for half a second. That was enough. Naomi let out a small breath, almost like a laugh, but there was no joy in it. It was the sound people make when pain becomes too much for tears. "You helped me choose my dress," Naomi said. Emma's face tightened. "You held my hand when I was nervous." Peter stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. "Naomi, don't do this here." She looked at him then, really looked at him. This man she had loved. This man she had defended when people warned her he was changing. This man whose mother had once told Naomi, with a smile too clean to be kind, that Peter needed a wife who understood his level. Naomi had ignored the insult. She had ignored many things, because she believed love could survive pride. But pride had walked into the church wearing Peter's face. "Don't do what?" Naomi asked, her voice still shaking. "Don't embarrass you?" Peter's eyes narrowed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." A quiet sound moved through the guests. Naomi felt something inside her crack harder than it needed to be. He had left her at the altar, in front of her parents, in front of her church, in front of strangers who would go home and repeat her pain over dinner, and somehow, in his mind, she was the one making it hard. Her mother began to cry. That sound nearly broke Naomi completely. She turned toward the front row and saw her mother's shoulders shaking, saw her father reach for her hand, though his own hand trembled. Her younger cousin was crying too. One of the flower girls looked confused, still holding her tiny basket, too young to understand why the beautiful bride looked like she had been pushed off a cliff without moving. Naomi wanted to run. She wanted to tear off the veil and disappear. She wanted the floor to open and hide her from the cameras, the whispers, the pity, the cruel little stares from people who had never liked her, but came for the food and the show. But her feet would not move. Peter turned slightly toward the pastor. "I'm sorry, Reverend. I should have said something sooner." The pastor looked at him with deep disappointment, but he said nothing. Emma took another small step. "Peter and I didn't plan for this," she said. Naomi looked at her, and for the first time anger rose through the hurt. "Then what did you plan?" Emma had no answer. Peter did. "Enough," he snapped. That one word changed the room. It was not just rejection now, it was control. He had broken her heart, and still, he wanted to decide how loudly she was allowed to bleed. Naomi lowered her bouquet. A few white petals fell onto the altar steps. Peter looked around, clearly embarrassed now, but not for what he had done. He was embarrassed because people were watching him lose control of the scene. That was Peter. Image first, truth later, feeling never. He leaned closer and spoke through his teeth. "Don't make me the villain." Naomi's eyes filled again. "You did that yourself." The church gasped. For 1 second, her voice had strength. Then the weight came back. Her shoulders dropped. Her lips trembled. The tears spilled before she could stop them. She looked down at her dress. The dress she had paid for in small payments over months. The dress she had stood in front of the mirror wearing, imagining Peter crying when he saw her. But he had not cried. He had not even looked sorry. He looked like a man inconvenienced by the pain he caused. And then came the worst part. Peter removed his boutonniere, slowly, like the ceremony was already over, like Naomi was already in his past. He placed it on the edge of the altar and stepped away from her. That small act destroyed whatever hope she had left. The church watched her break, and nobody moved. Not the wealthy guests Peter had invited to impress, not the business partners in their polished suits, not the women who had smiled in Naomi's face and whispered behind her back that she was lucky Peter chose her. Not even the people who pitied her had the courage to stand. Pain can be lonely even in a crowded room. Naomi stood in front of 300 people and felt completely alone. Then a sound cut through the silence. A chair scraped against the floor at the very back of the church. It was not loud, but it carried. Everyone turned. A man in a dark suit stood up slowly. He had been sitting near the last row, away from the family, away from the noise, almost hidden in the shadow beneath the balcony. He was tall, calm, and still in a way that made people notice him without understanding why. His name was Brian Cross. Most people knew the name even if they had never met him. Billionaire investor, private man. The kind of man who entered rooms quietly, but owned half the buildings in them. Peter had invited him for one reason, to show off, to prove that he was connected to power. But now that power was standing in the back of the church, looking straight at Naomi. Brian stepped into the aisle. The whispers stopped. Each step he took seemed to pull the room tighter. His shoes moved over the polished floor with a calm rhythm. He did not rush. He did not smile. He did not look at Peter. His eyes stayed on Naomi, not with pity, but with respect. That was what made her breath catch, because everyone else looked at her like she had lost value. Brian looked at her like she still had worth. Peter stiffened. "Brian," he said, trying to laugh. "What are you doing?" Brian kept walking. Emma shifted uncomfortably. Naomi stood frozen, tears still on her face, unsure whether this was another humiliation waiting to happen. Brian reached the front of the church and stopped at the foot of the altar. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to the pastor. His voice was low, clear, steady. "If she is willing," he said, "I'll marry her." The whole church erupted in shock. Peter's face went pale. Emma's mouth opened. Naomi stared at Brian as if the world had tilted beneath her feet. And Brian looked up at her, with every eye in the church on him, and said again, "I'll marry her." For a moment, nobody knew how to breathe. Brian's words stood in the middle of the church like a storm. "I'll marry her," not shouted, not forced, not spoken like a joke. Spoken like a man who had watched enough cruelty and decided silence was no longer holy. Naomi stared at him through her tears. Her heart was still broken, but now something else moved through the pain. Confusion, fear, a small flicker of hope she did not trust. She did not know Brian Cross. Not really. She knew his name because everybody knew his name. Billionaire investor, quiet power. The kind of man people lowered their voices around. The kind of man Peter had bragged about inviting, as if Brian's presence made the wedding more important. But now Brian was not standing beside Peter. He was standing near her, and that made the whole room shift. Peter laughed first. It was not a real laugh. It was sharp and nervous, the kind of laugh a proud man uses when he feels the ground moving under his feet. He looked around the church, hoping other people would join him. A few guests smiled weakly, unsure of what they were supposed to do, but most of them stayed silent. "You," Peter said, pointing at Brian like he had just heard the most foolish thing in the world. "You don't even know her." Brian did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Naomi. "I know enough," he said quietly. Peter's smile tightened. Brian took one slow step closer to the altar. "I know no woman deserves to be destroyed in front of people who came to celebrate her." The church went still again. Naomi felt those words land somewhere deep inside her, not because they fixed the wound. Nothing could fix it that fast, but because, for the first time since Peter stepped away, someone had said the truth out loud. Not the soft truth people whisper after damage is done. Not the polite truth people hide behind pity. The real truth. She had been destroyed in public, and Peter had done it. Her hands trembled around the bouquet. The white roses were crushed now, petals bent under the pressure of her fingers. Her veil clung to her damp cheeks. Her face felt hot. Her body felt cold. Everything inside her was shaking. But she stood there because there was nowhere else to go. The aisle behind her looked too long. The crowd looked too hungry. The altar beneath her feet felt like a stage built for her shame. Peter took a step forward, trying to pull the attention back to himself. He always knew how to do that. In every room, he knew how to make people look at him, listen to him, believe him. He was handsome in the clean, expensive way his family loved, tailored suit, polished shoes, smile practiced in mirrors. A man raised to believe that image was better than character. "Naomi," he said, his voice low but firm, "don't embarrass yourself more than you already have." The words cut deeper than the rejection. Naomi flinched. Her mother gasped softly from the front row. Her father lifted his head then, pain flashing across his face. Even some of Peter's own relatives looked away, because there are some things so cruel that even the guilty feel ashamed to hear them. But Peter did not look ashamed. He looked annoyed, as if Naomi's tears were making his betrayal messy, as if her pain was bad for his reputation, as if the woman he had just abandoned should still care about protecting him. Naomi opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her throat felt locked. Her eyes burned. She wanted to answer him. She wanted to say that he was the embarrassment, that he was the one who had turned holy vows into public disgrace, that he had invited everyone they knew, let her walk down the aisle, let her father give her away, let her mother cry tears of joy, only to break her in front of them all. But pain can steal language. So she stood silent, and because she was silent, Emma stepped forward. Emma moved like she had been waiting for permission. Her red dress brushed softly against the aisle as she came closer. The color looked louder now, crueler. It looked less like fashion and more like a warning Naomi had ignored. "Maybe this is for the best," Emma said, her voice smooth and gentle in a way that made Naomi's stomach turn. Naomi looked at her. Emma tilted her head, playing the role of the sad friend, the careful friend, the friend who wanted everyone to think she had suffered too. "Peter needs someone who fits his world," Emma continued. There it was, the truth beneath the betrayal. Not love, not fate, not confusion, status. Naomi felt the sentence move through the church like a blade. Peter needs someone who fits his world. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood it. It said what Peter had been too polished to say clearly. Naomi had never been enough for his family, never enough for the rooms he wanted to enter, never rich enough, never connected enough, never expensive enough. She had been good enough for late-night calls when Peter was tired, good enough to help him write speeches, good enough to pray with him when deals failed, good enough to sit beside him when he was unknown, unsure, and afraid. But now that his name was rising, now that wealthy people shook his hand, now that investors answered his calls, was suddenly too small for the life he wanted. She remembered the little things then. His mother looking at her natural hair and saying, "Are you wearing it like that to the engagement dinner?" His sister asking if Naomi's family could handle a wedding this size. Peter telling her not to talk too much around certain business people because they were different. The way he stopped introducing her as his fiancée and started saying, "This is Naomi," like her place in his life had become something he wanted to hide. She had felt it, she had seen it, but she had loved him too much to name it. Now Emma had named it for her. Peter needed someone who fit his world. Naomi lowered her eyes to the floor. The marble under her shoes reflected a broken version of her white dress. She looked like a bride in a dream that had turned into punishment. Brian's voice came again, calm but hard. "And what kind of world is that?" Emma blinked. Peter turned toward him. "Brian, stay out of this." Brian finally looked at Peter. The room felt smaller. "No," Brian said. "You invited me into this church to watch you become a husband. Instead, I watched you become a lesson." The words hit Peter across the face without Brian lifting a hand. A murmur spread through the guests. Peter's jaw clenched. "You don't know what happened between us." Brian's eyes did not move. "I know what happened in front of us." That silence that followed was heavy, because truth, when spoken plainly, does not need to shout. Naomi looked at Brian again. He was not smiling. He was not performing. He was not trying to look like a hero. He simply stood there with the kind of stillness that made cruel people nervous. And for the first time, Naomi noticed that his hands were relaxed at his sides. His posture was firm, but not proud. He did not look at her like a woman who needed rescuing. He looked at her like a woman who had been wronged and still deserved choice. That mattered, because in that church, everyone else had taken choice from her. Peter had chosen betrayal. Emma had chosen deception. The guests had chosen to watch. Even shame had tried to choose silence for her. Brian stepped closer, but not too close. He stopped at the edge of the altar, leaving space between them like respect was something you could see. His voice lowered. "You don't owe anyone an answer," he said. Naomi breathed in shakily. He continued, "You don't owe me one either, but you do deserve to leave this altar with your dignity." Her lips trembled. Dignity. That word almost broke her more than the insult had, because she had forgotten she still had any. She had been standing there feeling like a rejected thing. A mistake in a wedding dress. A woman people would pity today and gossip about tomorrow. She had thought the only way to survive was to run out before the tears became too loud. But Brian's words gave her another picture. Maybe she did not have to run. Maybe she did not have to beg. Maybe she did not have to shrink so Peter could feel taller. Peter scoffed, but the sound had less power now. "This is ridiculous, Naomi. Think. You're emotional. You're hurt. Don't let him turn you into a bigger joke." Naomi looked at Peter slowly. There it was again, the same old voice. The voice that told her she was too sensitive, too dramatic, too simple, too much when she cried. Not enough when she spoke. For years, that voice had shaped her into someone smaller, someone careful, someone always trying to prove she belonged beside him. But now, in front of everyone, she saw the truth. Peter had never wanted a wife. He wanted a mirror that made him look successful. Emma crossed her arms, her soft act slipping. "Naomi, don't make a scene. People already feel sorry for you." That sentence should have broken her. Instead, it burned something clean inside her. Naomi lifted her eyes. She looked first at Emma, the friend who had smiled beside her while hiding a knife behind her back. Then she looked at Peter, the man who had mistaken her kindness for weakness. Then she looked at the crowd, all those faces waiting to see what a humiliated woman would do next. Some were pitying her, some were judging her, some were enjoying it. And then she looked at Brian. He said nothing now, he only waited. For once, a man was not forcing her, not rushing her, not speaking over her, not telling her who she was supposed to be. He was simply standing there, offering her a door out of shame, but leaving her hand free to open it or not. Naomi's tears slowed. Her breathing changed. The church seemed to notice it before Peter did. Her shoulders straightened, just a little. Her fingers loosened around the crushed bouquet. One broken rose petal floated to the floor. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, careful not to hide her face. "Not anymore." Peter frowned, he warned. But this time, her name in his mouth did not control her. She looked at him with wet eyes and a steady voice that surprised even her. "No, Peter." The room went quiet. Naomi took one small step forward. "You don't get to humiliate me and then tell me how to carry the shame." Peter stared at her. Emma's face changed. And somewhere in the front row, Naomi's mother stopped crying. Naomi turned toward Brian. She did not smile. Not yet. Her heart was still in pieces. Her future was still unclear. But for the first time that day, she was not shaking. She looked at the man who had stood when everyone else sat. And in a church full of whispers, pity, and judgment, Naomi finally found her voice. "What exactly are you offering me, Mr. Cross?" But Brian's answer would reveal a truth Peter never saw coming. A truth that would destroy his pride, expose Emma's betrayal, and turn Naomi's worst day into the beginning of her redemption. Watch part 2 to see what Brian reveals, and why Peter immediately regrets leaving Naomi at the altar.